Imagine, just imagine what could be achieved in our schools, our communities, our country, if all students felt safe, respected, and cared for in school. What would our world be like if every student learned how to manage their emotions and how to cope with the impact of traumatic events, which for many of us are part of the human experience?
Today's students become tomorrow's parents, employees, and community members. That's why we believe trauma-informed and caring dispositions matter in the workplace and in our schools.
Everyone can learn how to use a trauma-informed approach to help students develop into healthy, productive adults. This is a picture of my 6th grade class. I'm the one in the front row in the fashionable plaid jumpsuit. Back then, classroom management focused on gum chewing and passing love notes, the 1970s version of texting. Paddling a student for misbehaving was acceptable back then. This was years before educators had the opportunity to interpret neurobiological research to transform how schools provide supports for students who have experienced childhood trauma.
Think about your school experiences. What were your relationships like with your teachers, the bus driver, secretary, coach, or principal? Did you feel cared for, valued, safe? Raise your hands if you ever felt disrespected, alone, or scared in school. Based on the number of hands, it appears most of you have experienced these feelings.
Fast forward a few decades. This is Donnell Middle School, where Darlene and I work and co-lead the Trauma-Informed Care Initiative for Findlay City Schools. In 2015, approximately 800 dedicated and compassionate, classified and certified employees participated in professional development as the first step in a journey to become a trauma-informed school district. We believe that all school employees are educators. Every employee has the opportunity to support a student in need.
Think of trauma-informed care as a universal approach that focuses on physical and emotional safety, caring relationships, and empowering students to build resiliency. This approach can be used with people of any age. You never know who may experience trauma.
A trauma-informed educator understands the pervasive impact of childhood trauma on the developing brain, body, stress response system, the social emotional well-being of students, their behaviors, and learning. A trauma-informed educator is also aware of the prevalence of childhood trauma. According to the Adverse Childhood Experience study conducted in the mid-1990s, 2/3 of approximately 17,000 adults reported that they experienced at least one form of childhood trauma. 12.5% experienced 4 or more forms of childhood trauma. Picture a typical high school classroom of 30 students. According to the Washington State Family Policy Council, 13 of those students, almost half, will have toxic stress from 3 or more forms of trauma, increasing the likelihood that they will lack motivation and exhibit behaviors that interfere with learning. People who experience 4 or more forms of childhood trauma are more likely to have long-term health problems, such as heart disease, respiratory disease, cancer, a poor immune system, or depression.
There are many forms of trauma that students may experience in their homes, community, and at times their school. Did you have an experience as a child that was traumatic? A highly stressful event that caused extreme fear and feelings of helplessness that overwhelmed your capacity to cope?
Physical, sexual, emotional abuse, neglect, a natural disaster, a serious accident, divorce, the death or imprisonment of a family member, drug abuse in the home, or witnessing domestic violence. If you experienced childhood trauma, did the adults in your school know? How did those experiences impact your behaviors? Did you act out, shut down, skip school, get into fights, or pretend as if nothing happened?
On top of daily life stressors, 21st century students also have to cope with the fear of a potential school shooting or classmates making threats on social media.
With this knowledge, educators use a trauma-informed lens to examine their beliefs about students and to change the way they interpret behaviors. The questions they ask change from, "What's wrong with you?" to "What has happened to you and how can I help?" They reflect on whether their tone of voice, their body language, or their mannerisms sound and feel caring. The educator may feel that they're caring, but what really matters is whether students believe the educator is caring.
A trauma-informed lens is used to transform traditional school perspectives into trauma-informed perspectives.
For example, a traditional perspective. "Sticks and stones may break my bones," finish it with me if you know it, "but words will never hurt me."
A trauma-informed perspective would be, words can hurt. People who are trauma-informed understand how to appropriately use humor to build relationships and avoid using sarcasm that can hurt or embarrass a student.
Misbehaving is a choice.
Well, kids can be kids. However, we need to figure out what's going on with the behavior. Behavior communicates something.
Punishing students by suspending them out of school for misbehaving is an acceptable approach and actually helps change behavior.
Discipline, if necessary, must be instructional and issued with care. We must avoid practices like putting a student who has experienced neglect in seclusion. This may be perceived as rejection and may re-traumatize the student.
Due to the prevalence and harmful impact of childhood trauma on students, educators must have a trauma-informed disposition. In my dissertation on the outcomes of a trauma-informed care training, I defined a trauma-informed dispositions as attitudes and beliefs that are empathetic and student-centered. An educator with a trauma-informed disposition meets the needs of all students, actively listens to understand student perspectives, and believes that all students can learn and heal. The educator is patient, approachable, and predictable. An educator with a trauma-informed disposition understands that students who have experienced childhood trauma may have a brain-based stress response to a trigger, such as a person's voice or mannerisms, an innocent touch, or getting in the student's space. The limbic system, the emotional center of the brain, may trigger a fight, flight, or freeze response, which may look like a misbehavior, but in reality, that response is meant to help the student survive the perceived or real threat. An educator with a trauma-informed disposition calmly models the behaviors they want their students to exhibit, and they remain calm in really challenging situations. They do not get offended by behaviors that could be interpreted as disrespectful or insubordinate, and they give students time and a safe place to calm down before addressing behaviors with care.
When we interact with students, we intentionally develop positive relationships. The #1 strategy to helping students heal from trauma is a relationship with at least one caring person. Relationships create feelings of connection and belonging. Our brains develop through interactions with others. We need connections for our survival. Traumatized students need connections and relationship for learning and to heal their brain. Building positive relationships helps students feel secure, important, and respected. The intersection of understanding the impact of childhood trauma, poverty, and multiculturalism on building restorative relationships with students is an approach Kelly and I call Care Matters.
It matters that all people embrace diversity and believe there's good in all students.
It matters that we give all students unconditional positive regard.
It matters that we give students choices so that they can feel in control while the rest of their world may feel uncontrollable.
Positive relationships are rooted in care, respect, and trust in a trauma-sensitive school. Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. As a result, we enter into trusting relationships with students where we see life through their perspective. Trauma-informed educators understand the student's perception of care may be different from their own, so they demonstrate compassion and empathy in a manner that is meaningful to the student.
When an educator uses a care matters approach, building positive relationships with students becomes their why. When an educator knows their why, their purpose, what they do has more meaning.
We as humans are wired for survival. However, we thrive within caring relationships. History is full of stories of people who have overcome hard life situations. Adverse childhood experiences are not a prescription for failure. Through building relationships, we as adults can help students heal and become resilient by teaching them skills such as how their brains work,
How to identify and communicate their emotions,
how to build on their strengths, use their resources, and how to calm themselves down with the use of mindfulness techniques.
with repeated positive interactions with healthy adults and practicing social emotional skills, students are better equipped to stay calm, to manage their emotions, so that the cortex, the thinking part of their brain, can be activated and they can learn.
Building relationships between the person giving care and the person receiving care is imperative for the healthy development of children. Resiliency trumps trauma. This gives us hope for the future. In closing, I would like to share a story about my hardworking 88-year-old dad. He and my mom raised 8 kids. He was a farmer, a proud man. I never heard him complain, and he was very kind. As a boy, my dad entered the classroom. Because the teacher was late, my dad and a classmate played tic-tac-toe on the chalkboard to pass the time. When the teacher arrived, the boys were punished with hard spankings. As my dad told this story, his china blue eyes welled up and tears ran down his face. I could tell he remembered how he felt when he was punished. He expressed old feelings of anger, injustice, and humiliation. He said if he could go back and do it again, he would not let him hit him this hard. And it wasn't right because he didn't do anything wrong. In reflection, I find my dad's story amazing. Out of all the memories, all the stories he could tell in the final days of his life, he told this story. His tears told me this experience still caused him pain. This story is a gift from my humble dad. It is a reminder to all of us that students remember their interactions with educators even after 70 years of life experiences.
The story that Darlene shared reminds me of a quote by Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
As you work and interact with others, whether in education or your chosen field, how do you want people to remember you years from now?
Thank you.